Going live. Scott, we're live.
There you go.
Whether anybody can see us or not, and how it sounds, I don't know. Are you waiting or is somebody
Uh,
else waiting?
Waiting for what?
I see somebody waiting for us to start. And there's a
Waiting where?
delay. Oh, there we go. Going live. Scott, we're live.
There you go.
Whether anybody Ooh, my audio is way quieter than yours. Sounds, I don't know. All right.
Well, we'll figure it out.
Adjusting it on the fly.
Waiting.
Waiting for us to start. All right, Scott, and there's
Waiting
a
where?
delay. Oh, there we go.
No, you can't. You can't do this.
I can't do this.
I'm hearing all the audio from YouTube back on your
There you
end.
go. Now you don't hear it anymore. It was through my speakers.
Okay.
I killed it. I was
Boy.
just making sure that we were all audio leveled. If somebody is listening and you're in Discord and you want to give us any feedback about audio levels, let us know if I need to turn one down or one up. But hopefully we are close now. I did go in and adjust it.
Someday you'll figure it out.
So
Hopefully.
part of it is the whole hardware change. Like switching to this Procaster, I did have to rebalance out some levels now. Anyways, Scott.
Anyways, here we are,
On a
all ready
Tuesday.
to talk about Azure stuff.
I haven't had lunch or coffee. So what Azure stuff? You have Azure stuff. I have Azure stuff. Should we switch over to our documentation of our Azure stuff that we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, let's do it.
Lab
So
services.
today we're going to chat, yes, about Azure Lab Services. Are you familiar with Lab Services?
I am not familiar with lab services. I am familiar with like the whole security lab stuff that you can do in Office 365. I feel like I've heard of lab services, but I could not actually tell you what lab services is. Without going in and reading the documentation, look at that. Here's an introduction to lab services, Scott.
There we go, just like that. Yeah, so I think just a few things. So Lab Services is an Azure service. It's a managed compute service that allows you to pre-provision templated virtual machines for people to execute like hands-on labs. So if you've
Okay.
ever wanted to run a hackathon, you could do something like that. Like I'm going to pre-provision a base template server, a Windows server, a Linux server, something like that. And I want to spin it up. I want to give the students in my environment the ability to stop, start, connect to their own machine, all that kind of stuff. So that's all there, ready to go for you. I think another use for this could be something along the lines of replacing your computer lab. Like maybe you're an educational institution and you have that existing PC lab that's all set up and ready to go, and you really want to turn it into thin clients so you don't need to keep buying servers every couple of years as leases lapse, things like that. So you can totally just have this configurable unit of compute that can be automatically assigned to users or sets of groups. And you're screwing me up because you're putting the echo back in
Sorry, my
as you're
fault.
as, as you're over there screwing around with things. So what you can do is you can say, hey, I want Ben, who's part of one group of folks, to have access to these sets of templates that they can basically go spin up anytime and execute either on their own or on a schedule for an unlimited amount of time, for a defined amount of time, things like that. So you can kind of have as many units of compute as you want, just based on the quota of your Azure subscription with this kind of over the top simplified view of things. So a good example around like scheduling might be, quite often somebody connects to a remote PC in the cloud, but then you're charged while that thing is running. and people aren't always doing things on it. Like they might walk away for 10, 15 minutes and you want it to automatically shut down so that you don't get charged for it. Like that's a nice cost optimization thing that you can put in place. Like shut down your VMs to save money kind of thing.
So with this, I see you create labs, you create lab plans, you can do, I think it was up here, you can pick virtual machine templates. Does this use like the image gallery? They keep changing the names on them. But essentially the Azure image gallery for templates. So if I wanted to define my own images that I used for these. Whether it's because I want certain software installed on it or I want it configured a certain way. You mentioned like computer lab scenarios where, I don't know, I think of like drafting and you want AutoCAD on it or something. Does
Mhm.
that use that same image gallery then? So you can go create your own gold images for these labs?
Yeah, there's actually a couple different paths. So one is you can create a lab that's based on a marketplace image. So you
Okay.
just start from a marketplace image and you can either say, I'm going to just use a marketplace image, or you can say, I'm going to use a marketplace image and then templatize it. Like I'm going to use it as a template that then I'm going to go do in something else on top of. Or or you can also use the Azure Compute Gallery, which is the customized gallery. So if you have existing images in your environment, you can go ahead and leverage those, or you can take a template that you create in Lab Services and you can push that template over to the Compute Gallery so that it could be used other places in Azure. So it's pretty flexible when it comes to the types of images and what you have access to. Where it's probably less flexible is in the units of compute that you have access to. So you might be used to browsing through, a couple hundred different VM series and all the permutations of sizes and things like that. Like I want a
Yep.
DSV4, a DSV5, I want, this, that, the other thing. VM series are abstracted away from you in this service. And really you're picking things like the underlying storage, like how much storage should be on the OS disk, and how many vCPUs and how much RAM should I have. But it's not telling you explicitly that, like, okay, this is this VM series with, this many ACUs or things like that. But you can totally map it back to say, like, oh, this is an F series VM or this is a D series, that kind of thing.
Right. So I guess I think back to computer lab scenarios or lab scenarios where you might be doing things like AutoCAD, or if you're doing a media class and you're rendering a bunch of media, where maybe you want to choose something that has one of the resources more dedicated to graphics. Do you have even that control then? Because if you can't see the series, you couldn't choose, like, I think it's the V series or the N series or one of those. Do you have some of those capabilities to choose graphics GPU options, or is it really just like CPU memory and you're going to get the standard D series?
Off the top of my head, it's CPU and memory, but we'll kind of get into it when we provision some of it out there.
Okay. And then I also saw too, you talked about some of the budget things. Uh, Schedules where it was allowing students to only use them during designated time slots, but also how many hours you want your lab users. So I know we've done this too in some of the training I do, where you spin up a lab and you say, as part of this class or as part of the lab that you get with this class, you get 16 hours of lab time or you get 80
Mhm.
hours of lab time, whatever it is. Looks like you can do that too, where it'll count down from a quota of lab hours. And then once you hit that, you just don't get access to it anymore.
Yeah, it's very very much in that model. So, like, why don't we go ahead and spin one up real
And
quick,
spin one up. All
and
right.
yeah, we'll kind of walk through the flow and what needs to happen with these
All
and what
right.
needs to
So
be in place.
we're over on yours now. Um, and we see the Azure portal are to the cloud labs.
Yeah, perfect. So I've already got one of these pre-created, and we'll go work with that one in a second. And I just did that for timing period purposes. But let's go ahead and create something new. So if we go into the marketplace, you can just search for lab plan within here. And then you've got this thing that's called a lab plan, and it's provided by Microsoft. It's in Azure Service. Lab plan is the only type of thing out there. It's not like a VM again where it has tons and tons of permutations.
Okay.
And you might look at this and go like, wow, it's really simple. There's not a whole lot going on here. So I'm going to give this lab plan a name. So I'll just call this my temporary lab plan for now. And I'm going to provision it in a region. This becomes important because you're tying units of compute to things. So you know how you have quotas within your subscription, like what's your VM quota within ARM and how much can you use of a given VM series, things
Yep.
like that. You'll want to make sure that you're provisioning your lab plan in a region where you have enough compute that you can come and associate it with it. And
Okay.
you'll see like when I'm selecting VM size and series and things, it's gonna
I was
it'll
just
yell at me and say, hey, you don't have enough here to make things work. You can totally do joining existing subnets, anything like that. Again, they need to be created, they need to already exist. And that's the subnet that the VNet and the subnet that your lab machines are going to join when they come up. So maybe you wanted to do a lab around, I don't know, file shares. Or you had a lab with SQL or something like that where you wanted to connect over a private IP and you have all that stuff already up and configured and running in an existing VNet. That's great. You can just bring that over, turn that on, and it's off to the races for you, kind of thing.
got it. I was just
In my
gonna
case, I don't have any of that, so I'll just leave it at the basics, and I'm basically going to say, here's my lab plan name, and here's my region.
got it. I was just gonna ask about that. Like this lab plan, when you're picking a region, you're tying all of your compute resources then to this region. It's not like you could pick East US 2, but then spin up VMs in VNet or in West US, something like this.
Right.
This is everything
Yes.
is going
So
to exist in
there
this
is some
region.
planning. Yeah, for sure. There's some pre-planning that needs to go on there. So in my case, I don't need any of that. I'm not a great admin, so I'm going to skip tags because cares will blow away the resource group later. And this will go ahead and create that lab plan. And this will actually should spin up pretty quickly. Like there's not a whole lot that's going on with a lab plan. You haven't actually created any of the compute yet. Like it's just kind of got some metadata that's going to be associated with it.
Got it.
So
If you don't pick the network, does it create a network as a part of this? If you don't pick like the existing VNet and subnet and all that, does that get created at this point in time, or do you have to go back and pick one later?
so one will be created for you later. You'll just never see it.
Got it. Okay.
So it's all abstracted and pushed away from you. So now that I've got my lab plan created, this is where I can come in. I've got some basic lab settings. So these are things like cost optimization things, right? Shut down on idle after this many minutes. You can detect idle in a couple different ways. That can be based on user absence, like lack of user activity, or it can be absence and resource usage. So you'd probably like say you had a long running lab where you're asking users to run a big script, and that script is going to take like 30 minutes to execute, and it's going to churn some CPU in the background. You probably don't want the virtual machines to shut down automatically in that case, even if the user gets up and walks away, kind of thing. So if there's no activity on the keyboard but there's CPU usage, go ahead and keep it running. You can also automatically shut down on disconnect and have that come. By default, it's 0 minutes after disconnect. I recommend cranking this up like just a hair because it is super aggressive. Like you'll find that you've let's say like you've SSH'd into your machine. So you set up your lab environment and the consumer of that lab VM, they SSH into the machine. If they get disconnected or they exit that SSH session, it will immediately shut down the VM. And that just might be something transient in the environment. So you probably want to leave it on for 5 to 10 minutes, but it's your money. I
Got
can't
it.
tell
So
you how to spend it.
for resource usage, do they give any guidance on like what is resource usage, or do they just kind of detect, this is a baseline idle resource usage, and if it's kind of above this baseline that they determine, it shuts it down?
So I haven't seen hard guidance on it. It might be out there, but it
Okay.
seems like it's just set on a baseline. So I can tell you, uh, like, you know, things like a Linux VM, like I've SSH'd into Linux VMs and done some application installs. So, you know,
Yep.
you do like apt install, blah, 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 on like an Ubuntu server, and that stuff doesn't seem to kick you out. And, you know, generally you're okay. But you can play around with these idle times as well. So if you say, hey, I don't want to be a super aggressive, like I feel like 15 minutes is
Right.
aggressive, and 15 minutes is actually the lowest you can go, then you can go up as high as you want to from there. It's really like how much you're willing to pay for within there. So you've
Got it.
effectively got like 15 minutes to 50
To 15.
59
Well,
minutes
and I
within
feel
there.
like
Yep.
resource usage, a lot of it's like you see a pretty consistent. If a computer's idle at maybe idles like at 10% CPU or something like that, I feel like there's not a lot of fluctuation in an idle computer with resource usage. So it should be relatively easy to figure out.
Yep. You can bring in additional regions, but it gets so this one gets a little bit weird to me. You've got kind of the parent lab plan resource, and then you can say like, okay, VMs are going to be created in these regions, kind of thing. Like you just come in and say select regions, and then, you know, I'm in East US and I want to be in East 2. So,
Yep.
you know, totally go ahead and bring in multiples if you want to. I think that makes it much more difficult. Like you're probably better off just, you know, templatizing through like an ARM template or a bicep template, something, creation of your lab plans, and then spinning up compute individually between them and just using something like an Azure compute gallery to get things to the right places and kind of where they need to be.
Got it. If you
Um,
add additional regions, does it bring in like messier networking, like peering VNets, or do they end
No,
up in
it
disconnected
won't do any
networks?
of that.
Okay.
It's all disconnected. So unless you bring that in ahead of time, then, you know, you won't have it.
Got it.
There's some late settings around Canvas in here if you're doing LMS, so like integrating with like a learning management system. So maybe you wanted to make this like a more formal thing, like, hey, when students are done with this class, go take this lab, and then, you know, tie that back into Canvas. Only tied into Canvas today. When it comes to marketplace images, so this is where you're going to go and say, like, here's the things that I want to bring into this environment to be created. So in my
Got it.
case, I want to bring in like an Ubuntu server, and let's also do Windows 11 Pro. Like I want to allow those two things in here, and I can see they're already enabled and they're all set. If I wanted to come through and let's do like Windows Server just to bring this down. So I want to do Windows Server 2022, and I'm really interested in the small disk version of that. Then you can go ahead, bring that in, enable it, apply, and then that's available as a type of machine, like an instance of a machine that you can go ahead and spin up within your lab environment. And then you've got your compute gallery. So you can either attach to an existing gallery or you can go ahead and create a new one. But that's really it for like the lab plan side of things. So you're just kind of sitting here in this state and you go like, okay, now what do I do from here?
Right.
uh, and what you do from here is you create labs. But the weird thing is, if I click that button now and we go over to another tab here, let's bring that up and we'll sign in.
So it takes you like
Now I'm
out
at
of the port.
labs.azure.com.
Yeah, it takes you like
And
completely out of the portal.
yeah, and this has an annoying habit. Like I'm a member of multiple Azure Active Directory tenancies. It has a habit of every time you land here, regardless of the subscription that's spelled out up in the URI, you would think like, oh, it can figure out what tenancy to put me
Right.
into automatically. It doesn't. It always lands you in the first tenant alphabetically. So in my case, like I need to actually switch over to the tenant that has my lab services within it. So I can see now I've got my to the cloud labs here, and you know, we should be all set and ready to go.
My labs and all
Now from
labs.
here, I can go ahead and create a new lab. So let's just call this my temporary lab. A couple of things. Like I always thought this should be like a friendly name. Like I should be able to say this is like, like super awesome hackathon
Right.
kind of thing.
Like it tells you right
And
there, this is the what the students are going to see.
yeah, but you can't do that. You can't have any spaces or anything like that in the name. So you end up like camel casing or
Can you do
whatever you're
underscores
gonna.
for dashes? Or is it only
No,
characters?
you can do underscores and things like that, but there is a limit to that string. I forget what it is off the top of my head. So I had two different lab plans over there, but I'm going to use the new one that we just created, which is that temp lab plan. And then within that temp lab plan, we had all those images. So like small disk Windows Server 2022 was a marketplace image that I enabled, and I said, hey, let's make this available over here. In this case, let's say we want to do a lab that's based on Linux. Now, here's all my virtual machine sizes. Again, there was no place for me to select VM sizes
Oh,
over
interesting.
in the Azure portal. So, like, these are all time back. Like, I think this is an F series. Yeah, this is an FSV2. So you're coming in and you're saying, like, okay, basically, how much do I want to pay per hour to have that thing running? But these really just equate back to other VM sizes. But thankfully, you can do things like VMs that allow for nested virtualization. So, say you wanted to do like a Hyper V lab, you could totally do a Hyper V lab, but it might not be as flexible as you want it to be. Like
But
I
this
think of like some of the open hacks and things I've done, like you needed 64, 128 gigs of RAM on those machines. 32 probably wouldn't be enough to get you there, or even like the disk sizing, because you're only getting one OS disk here. You're not getting like an OS disk plus N data disks behind it. So it's a little inflexible. Like I would love to see that change over time. Like, let me just select a VM size series and give me a layout for disks that I want on it,
right,
especially if you're gonna charge me for it anyway.
four CPUs or eight CPUs and 32 gigs of RAM is like, let me go run maybe two VMs if I'm lucky on it. Um,
Yeah, so it depends on what you're doing, but in this case, like, we'll just do, like, a quick little Linux VM kinda thing, so I'll just choose a small because 'cause that'll be fine. Oops, I closed my thing there, so this was going to be our super
so this
awesome.
only lets you do then while you're filling this out. This is only going to let you do a single VM. Like you can't stand up four or five VMs that are part of a lab that are all networked together. The only way, if you need more than one VM per student, is to do the nested virtualization, in which case you're limited to
Correct.
those eight CPUs. Because to
Yep.
your point, like I've done some too, where it's like you need a Windows 10 box, you need a DC, you need a couple servers. You're actually running four or five different VMs all networked together, and yeah.
Yeah. It gets interesting. So there's potentially a couple of other pitfalls in here for you as well. Um, so usernames and passwords for the virtual machines that are created, you have some flexibility there. So you can define admin and
And then not
non-admin
admin.
accounts. Yeah, I'll just do a bad thing and I'll define a single admin account, and we'll use the same one on every single VM just for the purposes of demonstration. You can use the same password for all virtual machines, or you'll give students like a default password and they'll come in and then they'll be prompted for a new one kind of thing. Uh, Lab hours. So this is where we start to get into the scheduling thing. Like scheduling wasn't within the lab plan, it's within the lab that's a child resource, like a sub resource of the lab plan itself. So how many lab hours are available to students outside of scheduled events? And that's pretty important because you can have scheduled times that they can use it, and then you can say you can also use it outside of these times. You also have to define the connection types that are going to be allowed in at the time that you create the lab. So I
Hmm.
was playing around with this in the past and I really screwed it up. I was like, I'm going to create a Linux lab. And I think it'd be super easy if we could just, create a template where I already had RDP installed on the server. So I could show that we can do both, like
Right.
SSH and RDP to the server. You can't come back and change this later. You- so if you think you're going to need RDP connectivity, even if you're doing a Linux lab, go ahead and just check that box. This does not install like XRDP or anything on a Linux server or X2Go. It doesn't do any of that. It's just opening up the ports and protocols because again, you're in a managed VNet, all that kind of stuff. And then you've got the same settings here. So this is just inheriting the settings that are coming down from the lab plan itself. You might need some type of flexibility within the lab. And then last step is, do I want to use this machine without any customization? Or do I want to have the opportunity to customize it a little bit? So I think
Okay.
in many cases, like you'll probably want the ability to customize it a little bit, unless you're taking students through like an out of the box Windows or Linux experience kind of thing. Like if I wanted to show somebody how to install IIS the first time, I might just go with the straight, hey, use a virtual machine image without any customization. Other than that, I probably want to do just a little bit of tweaking before I go ahead and give it over to students.
So I have a question on the last screen, the RDP and the SSH stuff, and you can tell me. We'll look at it in a minute if you want to. I know a lot of labs that I've done, you do the RDP through like a Bastion or through the browser or something like that versus just opening up port 3389 to the internet for anybody to try to access. Um, do you want to answer how that works right now, or do you want to show me once we get this together?
I can show you. I'll answer it and I'll show you. So it's just opening ports, but it's not opening the default ports. So you'll
Got
be
it.
given some NATed ports on the way through. So I've seen for like SSH they use port 4891, something like that. And I think the last RDP one I saw was on port 7000. So
Okay.
so they're doing some natting back to the default ports on their side within kind of like the on behalf of service kind of it.
Got it. So they're putting
So
some
so
type of
this will take a
protection in there.
minute or two just to spin up.
Okay.
What was
So
that?
they're putting some type of safety in there so people can't just go start looking for VMs running in Azure Labs with 3389 open and trying to access
Right, but if
these lab
somebody's
VMs.
port spraying like Azure IP addresses, they could totally still find it. Like you shouldn't be running your production workloads kind of thing in here, right? Like uh these are definitely lab environments. So let's go ahead and while that's kind of spinning up, let's come back over to the portal. So I'm going to go back to my resource group and you can see here's my lab. So here was my lab plan. We started with temp lab plan, and
Yep.
then I created that super awesome lab within it. And that lab got created as a resource on the Azure side. So I'm actually viewing it in two different places. I can view it through the lab services portal. So that labs.azure.com, or I can view it through the Azure portal with some subtle differences. So if I come in here, if I come in, like I can see the properties around it, but I can't make any changes over here. I can do things like resource locks. Like there's not actually a whole ton going on over here. But what I can do is I can set RBAC on the lab resource. So say I wanted to share this with you, like we want to be co-admins in here.
Yep.
I can come in and give you a role assignment where I can say, hey, I want to add Ben as a lab contributor. Maybe I want you to be a lab operator. I want you to be somebody who can actually sign in to the labs.azure.com portal and be able to spin up an additional lab against the pre existing lab plan, that kind
Got
of thing.
it.
So you can kind of
Interesting.
have co-admins within there, things like that. Like there is some flexibility with what's available to you. So you can go ahead and make those member assignments. That's all just standard Azure RBAC kind of things, right? Like I'm just going to give access to this resource, but everything else that's managed here. So you can see like here's my virtual machine size that was spun up for this particular lab. all that stuff, like it's all just fixed data at this point. I can't make any changes to it. And really, if I wanted to make changes to it, that means creating an entirely new lab, either in a new lab plan or within the existing lab plan.
Got it. Because once a lab is created, it's pretty locked down in terms of changes that can be made.
Yeah, so that one's still spinning up a little bit. So let's go take a look at a different one here. So earlier, I created a lab plan called To the Cloud Lab. And then within that lab plan, I have a lab that is called just To the Cloud. So if we open that one up, Portal's going to do a stupid thing. Let's go back here, all labs.
And it doesn't. Oh, you broke it.
No, it's because it's. Let's see. Let's do some manual URI jump. Let's hop out, hop back in if it refreshes.
So does that have to do with the way that it constructs those URLs for subscriptions and all of that? Is sometimes you don't always get.
I have no idea. The whole thing is just absolutely wonky. See, like now it's not even showing me my lab that I created before.
The resource is gone.
And this is where good demos fail. Let's see, what do we do? So go to slab, default me. It's like it just forgot straight up who I am. Oh, there we
Oh,
go.
this is a new
Oh,
screen.
yeah. That immediately said, nope, I don't want to do that. You want me to go through the welcome
Did you know
again?
this is the easiest way to create labs, Scott, as we are currently demonstrating?
You know, it all worked out pretty good when I was doing it earlier, and I had to go and create this extra thing for you just to show it off. Well, this will be like the world's shortest demo. It
Yeah,
doesn't
this is
come
kind of
back.
weird.
Let's try one other.
Incognito browser window. Maybe it's because Edge needs an update. I see your little update icon in the upper right hand corner. We can blame it on Edge. Can we blame stuff on Edge?
And what? It's our whole session. Start it. Sign in. You.
My labs.
Well,
All labs? Any labs?
any labs. All right. Well, that kind of broke down pretty.
Sure, other labs still. Well, we lost that screen, didn't we?
Well, it should be there, right? Like theoretically,
It
Scott's
provisioned.
super awesome lab should be provision. It is not in another organization.
Is that a chat bubble? Is that to chat with support? Or is that a monitor window?
No, it's just a monitor. It's just an icon.
What does the icon do? Anything? Oh, my virtual
Shows
machines.
you shows you your virtual machines that are already running. Well, let's do this if it got really so add role assignment. I want to be operator to self Even sign, yes.
You have been invited and assigned.
That's excellent. It added me as a guest to my own directory, which is just brilliant. That is my current directory. That is where I want to be.
You have officially lost your resources. Is that
I
kind of like
did.
losing your marbles?
A little bit. It's gonna make it a. This will be my not so awesome. Awesome
So suffice
lab.
it to say, Azure Lab Services could use a few
Robust
bug
service.
fixes.
But yes, just do the same. And sure. Uh, two, six,
Maybe you've run out of resources.
so I haven't. I actually have one of these spun up in a different place. So let me switch windows. We could at least do the student experience, but I think that's going to be ever so slightly weird because I think it's helpful to see the actual lab experience. So now I'm signed into lab services as another user. I can't show you the invite flow for this because this requires me, being able to get into the labs
Get
in the
in.
other way.
So this would be, in theory, the lab was spun up. You saw the lab. The VMs were created. You got everything set up. And now this is you as a student wanting to go in and start this lab.
Correct. Yeah. So this is me on the student side. So I've configured my template. I've published my template as an admin, as like a lab operator. So I've done those two pieces. I've created a schedule. So, like in today's case, just from like 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern. And I've made sure that, like, hey, students can use this outside of lab hours, anything like that kind of thing. So I've done all that bootstrapping. I made sure that my lab environment was configured the right way. It had SSH and RDP open to it. And, I also invited this person as a user. So it's a little weird. Let me see. I don't know how much of this is going to show. So this could be dangerous. But we'll come in really quick here and we'll look and say, hey, I want to register for a lab. So you can see that it gives me this registration link to
Got it.
actually pop in and see a lab. And once you've registered for the lab that you've been invited to, then you'll go ahead and be able to see that environment and get it all spun up. So a couple of things here. I hit running or I hit start. So now the VM is running. Once the VM is running, I can connect to it. I can connect via RDP or SSH. If I'm in a Linux environment, remember when I was creating the lab, it said, hey, I had to explicitly check off RDP and explicitly check off SSH.
Yep.
If you don't check off the protocol will not be available to connect with. You basically have to blow the entire lab away and start from scratch and reprovision it, redo your template, like if it wasn't a compute gallery template, things like that. So make sure you pay attention to all that. You can always reset your machine. There's some light troubleshooting in here, like, hey, I just want to do a redeploy, kind of like you would do through the Azure portal. Or in this case, I've got RDP set up. So this was an Ubuntu template that I installed XRDP on. So I can go ahead and get that RDP information. So if we just copy that, and then if I go over to my RDP client and I say, hey, I would like to connect to that thing, we're running. So
We can't see your RDP client. I don't know if you were going to share your RDP client.
you will in a second. So I got to get that window up. So let me hit stop sharing there and then I'll share my screen again. and share. There we go. So now this is me
Got it.
RDPing into that lab VM. Like I said, it was an Ubuntu kind of thing. I installed XFC on it, and I installed XRDP and configured it in the template, and then I published the template out and pushed it over. So now students have the ability to connect to this VM over both SSH and RDP, depending on how they want to get at it, and get it all together. Um, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna do a couple things
Nifty.
here. So I'm gonna close that window real quick,
So
and
do
I'm gonna
all
come back
these
over.
VMs end up in their own networks? Or if you have 20 students, are all these VMs sitting on the same network for those 20 students? Like, could they start messing with each other
They're
or see
all
each
in
other's
their
VMs?
own. They're all in their own as far as I remember. Like, but again, you can do the thing where you create a subnet and you put them all on the. You can put them all in the same VNet and all on the same subnet.
Got
So
it.
I'm gonna come back over. So my not so awesome lab template finished provisioning up. So this is that experience where it was crashing out and it wasn't showing me before. But I can see here I've got a dashboard. This gives me a cost estimate based on number of quota of VMs that I'd spun up. In this case, I said, hey, let's do 10 machines. I've got my VM template here. So remember, I had that little radio button that said, do a template or just give me the out of the box image. In
Yep.
my case, I said, do a template. So if I wanted to customize this, I have to do a couple things. I have to start it up because it's a virtual machine. It's got a boot. And then once it's started, I'll be able to SSH into it because it's a Linux box in this case. And then I can make any customizations to it. I can exit that session and then I can publish it out so that it's available for
Got it.
students.
So that's where if you
Uh,
didn't want to do the whole gold image thing, you could customize it at this template point in as
Correct.
students spun it up, it would take everything that you've done to this template.
Yep.
Got it.
That's 100% it. So a couple of things. So I've got my user access over here. So my user, like in this case, let me invite my podcast account. Podcast.com. I'm going to add that user, or I can synchronize this to an Azure Active Directory group. So if you
Okay.
had like a pool of users who are all in an AAD group, you can just sync that AAD group to the lab as well. So I'm going to say, okay, this user is going to be invited. So now that's going to send an email off to that other user. So the other user won't see this thing appear until they've accepted that invite. So they do have to go in and do that piece. Here's my scheduled event piece. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, okay, let's what type of event am I running? What's the date it runs? What's the time zone it runs in? Give it a quick description. Go ahead and click save. And then there was the scheduling piece, or I guess the settings piece in the schedule that I set on the lab plan itself, not within the lab, but in the lab plan, like allow students to use this for N hours outside of the scheduled time too.
Okay.
So I'm really saying from 1:30 to 3:30, like students can use this, but they can also use it for 10 hours outside of it. You just can't see that configuration from here because you have to go and hop all the way over to the Azure portal. So you come back over to the Azure portal to up here and our temp lab plan and our lab settings there. And then you can kind of play around with some of this on this side. So it's a little bit of a disjointed experience because you're floating like in and out of
Right.
these two portals just as you're kind of kicking around and doing things.
Huh. Interesting.
So I'm going to go ahead as a user on the other side, and I'm going to register for that lab. All right, so a couple of things here. So even though I added that user, so if I go back and I look at my users now, we should be able to. I'm really scared to refresh the screen. I'm really scared.
Will it come back? Will it not come back?
No, it says I'm registered for the lab. I've got to actually put virtual machines in the pool. So based on the number of users that I have, like let's say I was going to have 3 users in here, then I've got to go ahead and put at least 3 virtual machines up in the pool so that those 3 users can actually see some labs and be able to get at the virtual machines that are provisioned out within them.
Got it.
If that makes any sense for you.
Yep. That makes sense. Huh. So this is just me thinking as I've been watching you. Let's say
So
you
then
did
I
this.
take
Okay, keep
this
going. Sorry.
machine. Yep. So I can see like this machine's
Yep.
signed. I don't know why this user. Yep. So here's where I can see the hours for that user. Uh, my pool is all set there. And then I've got my template. Like I said, I could go mess with my template. So like if I wanted to SSH to this right now, I could go to SSH to it. Once it's all set, I'll go ahead and publish it. So part of the problem is my virtual machine pool, like nothing's assigned right now because I don't have any published images over here. So I
So do
go and I
you
publish
have
this out. And then once this is published, which is kind of like the sealing process. So like on a Windows VM, you know how you might do like an out of the box experience sealing of an image,
yep.
or you know they have that equivalent process on Linux that Microsoft came up with. Like it's doing the same thing there. Like if you're logged into your template and you hit publish, you'll be kicked out of your session because the thing's being shut down and sealed.
Got it. So by default, there's not going to be anything published. You're always going to have to at least go in and publish one of them, whether you make any changes to it or not.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So I have a question a little bit going back to the network. When you could do advanced networking and you could choose your own VNet, could you, in theory, have additional VMs in there? So we had talked about labs where maybe you need a whole bunch of virtual machines. In theory, you could already have some VMs maybe sitting in that VNet. When you go create your lab, you choose an existing VNet, an existing network, and students could then maybe RDP like from their lab machine into some of those other machines or access resources on those other machines in that existing network kind of via the lab.
Totally. Yeah. Because when you're over here and you're creating that lab plan resource, just search for that again, lab plan create, and we go to the networking tab. You're actually selecting a virtual network and a subnet. So
Okay.
I just don't have any VNets created here. So you're basically delegating a subnet to be managed by the lab plan, but existing subnets aren't going to be touched. So at that point, it's just your own routing. Like if you had like custom route tables or anything like that
Yep.
going, or potentially NSGs that are affecting how traffic flows within your environment.
Okay. Very cool. Like I definitely see a lot of I see a lot of potential for how this could be improved. I would agree it's interesting how you kind of jump around between those two
I'm
different
scared to
portals.
click away from it now. Like, see, so like now, why is it showing me only my one lab? It's all broken and not so fun. But yeah, so that would be the basic flow. Like I said, is once this template publishes out, then I can come into the pool. I can go ahead and see that those will be assigned to
Oh,
users,
so
and
while it's
then my users.
publishing, so while it's publishing, it already started assigning one of those to you and is creating that VM and stuff. When you
Yeah,
looked
so
at
in this
that
case, I
pool.
said, "Hey, I have a virtual machine pool. That pool has 3 VMs available to it, and I have 1 user in the pool so far who's registered." So it'll just go ahead and show those. And then on the user side of it, what's happening is like if I stop sharing here and I share this window again, so you can see over here that it pops up, and if I actually hit the share button. There we go. You can see that there's my not so awesome lab. It's a Linux lab, and I've registered for it, but that virtual machine's not available to me yet because it's still being published out. So it does take some time to seal that image and push it out. I guess the important thing to note would be, let me go back to the portal again. To share that. So if I go back over to the Azure portal and I go to my resource group, at no point in here do I see the template. I don't see the
Huh.
templated VM. That was a running machine, right? I
Right.
don't see that machine running any place in here. I don't see individual versions of VMs that are running anything like that. Like that is all happening on behalf of you as a customer in that case. So I guess it's maybe a little bit like the cloud PCs are with Microsoft 365, where it's really like Azure Virtual Desktop in the background. It's AVD, but it's managed away from you.
Right. You don't really have any insight into where they're running, how they're running, any of that. It's just kind of it's running, it's out there, you know it's out there somewhere and you're still going to pay for it.
Correct. Yeah, yeah, it's out there. It's doing something, and you will pay for it. In this case, $27 if all my users access it for exactly the amount of time that I've said they're going to need the lab.
Got it. So hours users 138. Huh. Scheduled. Very interesting.
Yep. So that is lab services
Labs.
in a nutshell.
Are you scared to click on anything else, Scott? You keep hitting
Well, I
those
kind of
drop
am,
downs and you're like, do I click on it or not?
but I should be able to see. Like I have, this is a really poor experience because this is 100,000% a lab plan that was provisioned this morning that has a customized template. Like that was the machine that I already would into earlier, right? Like we saw
Right.
me be able to go ahead and pull it up as a user. Now I'm that same user and I'm logged in and I can't see it at all.
It's like the whole
Or
thing just got
that
disconnected.
lab that we created. Yeah, the super awesome lab that we created. I can't do anything with it. Like, I don't know, is it hanging out there? Am I being charged for it? Maybe. Who knows?
Can you at least delete them from the Azure portal so you don't get charged for them?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. So over on this side, they are just Azure resources. So if I take my super awesome
So you could
lab.
go in and
Yep.
delete Super Awesome Lab and it would.
Yep. Now, note when I click delete, like it said, do you want to delete this and its virtual machines? So it is like it's cleaning up all that stuff in the
It's a
background.
destructive process.
Yes. Yeah, but if I come in here and I say, "Hey, show me my virtual machines," there's
You've got
effectively no virtual machines
nothing
running in
there.
my subscriptions. They're all running in Microsoft subscriptions, like on behalf of somebody else.
Can you see how much each student has used? I
No.
can't remember if you showed that. Like if you go in and from like a teacher and an admin perspective of you have quotas hours, you have scheduled
Oh, yeah,
hours.
yeah.
Okay, so it's
So I
over
can see
there.
how
You
many
do have
hours
quotas hours.
that individual has used, but there's no, like, grand aggregation for that along the way.
Got it. So there's not a ton of reporting then. It's just kind of that budget, estimated cost, and then some of this reporting under your users.
Correct. Yeah, you're on the hook for kind of potentially, like, I view this as a almost max cost. So like my issue with this is this is showing me a projection based on the quota, virtual machine pool, things like that. Like if I change the pool or I change the quota later, then this all gets thrown out of whack. It's also not showing me the charges associated with the time that I spin up my template and configure that.
Got
So
it.
say you've got that big beefy nested VM thing and you want to spin it up, you want to deploy Hyper-V on it, you want to configure a bunch of sub VMs, things like that. Like that's a couple hours that that machine needs to run at $N an hour before you even get to the point of provisioning it and tying it all together.
Right. And this isn't going to show you a running cost either. It's not going to take into account that I have 3 students with 36 hours budgeted each, but they only accessed it for 10 hours. So this is my
Correct.
current running total. This is what this kind of
Yeah,
like you said, this is going to be
this is
close
my
to your
worst
max
case
cost.
scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Sort of ish. Like I said, if you
So
can do all
yeah,
the other back of the napkin math.
depending on how long it
Uh,
takes you to configure your template.
well, you know, the lesson is just configure one template and configure only one lab, and you'll be fine.
Yeah. All
Other than
right.
that, don't do anything.
Well, interesting. Thanks, Scott. I had not seen that or used that. How long has this been out? Do you know? Is it
Oh,
relatively
quite
new?
some, quite some time. It used to be a different service. Like it's gone through multiple iterations, but uh, labs, a couple of years at least, I believe.
Got it. Huh. It'll be interesting to see. Like, it's not one that I've seen a ton of. So it's always interesting to see if they, where it goes, if they continue to iterate on it and build on it and all of that.
It does like it has kind of changed a little bit over time.
Oh, now they're all gone again, Scott. Your
Yeah,
not so
yeah.
awesome
See,
lab is gone.
I did it, but it's over here. I can still see it over here. As long as I don't click away from this window, I'll be all set. Lesson learned. Never close the window. I should go and give them some feedback. How satisfied are you? Yeah. Hey, any PMs and lab services, if you're watching this and you want to chat with me, hit me up in Teams.
Yeah.
I would love to give you some feedback. Yeah, like come on,
Like,
really?
that's weird. It's just gone.
I can't do any. That's yeah. No.
Anyways, with that, since all your labs are gone, except for this one browser window, that
Yep.
must
With
live
that,
on forever.
we should wrap this one up.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to go get a bite to eat and some meetings and some work and all that. So thanks for that introduction to Azure Lab Services, Scott.
All right.
And
Thanks, Ben.
we'll be back later another week with some more Azure goodness on the to the cloud. So you're welcome, and we'll talk to you later.